there, and welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Mark Simon from Sports Info Solutions. We've got three of my colleagues here today. Matt Manocherian.
Hey, what's going on?
Nathan Cooper.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Alex Vigderman.
Howdy.
All right, with the NFL season upcoming, we thought we'd do one of those let's answer 10 questions about the NFL shows, but do it a little bit differently. For each question, we'll have three mics active. Mine to ask the question, one mic to share a scouting take, and one mic to share a statistical take. The two will be given equal time, about 90 seconds each. Nathan's always going to be the scouting guy. Alex is always going to be the analytic guy, and Matt's going to bounce back and forth between the two. So let's start with the most basic question, the one that could basically render all the others moot. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? Matt, let's get the scouting take first.
Well, this is boring because it matches the odds, but I've got to go with the Chiefs as far as the team that I would say is the most likely to win the Super Bowl. And it really comes down to Patrick Mahomes. He's the best player at the most important position. It really hasn't been close if you look over the course of the past 3 years, really, about who the best quarterback in the NFL has been. It's a no-brainer type situation. Who the number one player you'd want to start a team with is in the NFL today. What he does on schedule in terms of being able to run things within the scope of the offense, and then off schedule with his ability to do things when plays break down. Obviously, it wasn't enough in the Super Bowl, but I mean, he was running for his life out there. That brings me to the biggest hole on this team. It's the offensive line. We saw it in the Super Bowl last year. Expect a work in progress. I'm not saying because I think they're the most likely to win the Super Bowl that they're going to come out in week one and that they're just going to have a gelled offensive line. But I think over the course of the season, we'll see that new group of guys. I think they have 8 new offensive linemen on the team. They'll come together. Kyle Long will come back off the PUP list at some point after week 6. I think he'll fit into there. And then you add that into what they have at the receiver position. Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, they're as close to having Steph and Giannis on the floor together as you have in the NFL from a receiving core perspective, bringing the different skill sets that you need to succeed at all levels of the field. I feel like I'm running out of time, but I should mention them defensively. As you get more and more time under Steve Spagnuolo, I think you get better. It's a complicated defense, but I think that bodes well over time as we started to see as the year wore on last year. Best coordinators in the league, Bieniemy, Spags, and Dave Toub.
That's boring. Let's move on. Alex, what do you got for the numbers?
So let's stay boring, and we'll go with the Buccaneers to repeat. And the big thing is they basically are running it back with a very similar roster to what they had last year. Obviously an older quarterback, and that's a problem, but the state of the rest of the roster in terms of the total production across the entire team, that team had the highest wins above replacement in the league last year, and they're basically running it back. Unsurprisingly, based on that perspective, we'd expect them to do really well. And similar to Matt's point about teams gelling towards the end of the year, the Bucs did not start off great last year, and they figured it out towards the end of the year and became somewhat of a juggernaut by the end of the year, especially in terms of underlying stats. So I think that they're statistically a great choice. Obviously, there are risks associated with having a 40-plus-year-old quarterback, and that is a thing. But also the Chiefs, if we're picking against them, their defense needs to perform above. They were essentially bringing back minimal wins above replacement from last year's roster. The offensive line has to gel in order for them to succeed. Mahomes was able to outperform Brady in terms of total points in the Super Bowl, but they lost because the rest of the team didn't support him. And so they need to be able to pick him up to have that kind of awesome year.
All right. That was boring. That was obvious. That was clear. Give me an alternative, each of you. You got 15 seconds each.
Ooh, Alex, you got one? I got to think about it a little bit from a scouting perspective.
That'll take a little bit more time. In terms of returning wins above replacement, the Bills are next in line, and obviously it hinges on Josh Allen maintaining the gains he made last year, and I view that as somewhat of a risk. I actually have an article that I haven't quite published yet that shows that some of his accuracy.
Good call. We like it. Now, what do you got, Matt?
The Cowboys are the weirdest team I can think of that I could see actually being a real contender. See them at 9.5 wins on the over-under, and I think with Dak coming back, with their receiver core that they have, their offensive line getting healthier, I think that they're a high upside team as much as Mike McCarthy makes me squirm as I say that.
All right, I like that. So you've got the Bills, Cowboys, kind of like your sleeper picks. All right, something a little more modest here. Nathan Cooper, which non-playoff team in 2020 has the best chance to make the playoffs in 2021? Give us the scouting take.
Yeah, I'll make it a little less boring, and I'll call out the Broncos here. I think the Broncos are a good team here. They had a ton of injuries last year. 5-11 team. That roster is way better than that. I think we went through about 10 corners on the defensive side, so they had a lot of turnover there. A lot of those guys are back healthy. Cortland Sutton, one of their best players overall at receiver, played one game last year. So he's back. He looked good in the preseason. Drew Lock didn't progress like a lot of people thought he would. So now it's Teddy Bridgewater's job to lose. And then you're looking at the running back position. Melvin Gordon is probably going to start the season there, but Javonte Williams, I think, is going to take over there midseason. He was one of our top-rated running backs, tough runner, breaks a ton of tackles, brings plenty of pass game impact as well, whether it's catching the ball or in pass pro. The offensive line is improving. And then you look on the defensive side, Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, Alexander Johnson is a really strong front. They're strong in all three aspects of the game. And it's tough to find guys who are much quicker and have a better first step off the ball than Von Miller and Bradley Chubb. So I think the Broncos are a team, if they stay healthy, even in a tough division, they're one of those teams that I think could make a little bit of noise sneaking into the playoffs this year.
Alex, what do you got from a numbers perspective on this?
So I was actually kind of expecting the 49ers to come up here. So I will at least mention them because they were in the Super Bowl recently and had a lot of injuries similar to the Broncos. And I don't even necessarily need a lot of stats to just mention them as a plausible option. I actually kind of like all of the NFC West. And so I kind of think that the Cardinals are an interesting option here. Both the Cardinals and the 49ers were in the top half of the league in terms of returning wins above replacement last year. So they kind of were on that borderline in terms of skill production to make it into the playoffs last year. And Cliff Kingsbury, that coaching staff, still has some time to kind of figure things out. They haven't really blown things up offensively yet. They were top 5 in terms of our decision score, which is like how well they make decisions on fourth downs. And often that involves being aggressive. And they're spreading a lot of people out, but they're not really getting a lot of production out of it. Like in terms of their 4 wide sets, which they use way more than everybody else. They actually got a negative EPA passing from Kyler Murray last year. And so they're just not quite clicking yet. And I feel like there's obvious upside in terms of that team. And then they added a couple sort of veteran guys with injury risk with AJ Green and JJ Watt, which are just kind of interesting. If they can sort of stir the echoes, there's some upside there as well.
Nathan, who's the quarterback for the Broncos in the playoff game?
I think it's going to be Teddy. I think Bridgewater is going to be able to get through. I've been on a couple of Broncos podcasts over the summer, and I don't think one of them can make it through the entire season. So I'm a little worried about him making it through the full season. But I think he could have a breakout year and be the guy, if they do make the playoffs.
All right. So Teddy Bridgewater in the season opener, Teddy Bridgewater in the playoff game. We'll come back to teams in a second, but I want to get to player topics and stay with quarterbacks. And the juicy question is obviously, who's the breakout quarterback of 2021? Matt, who do you got for scouting?
I think from a scouting perspective, there are kind of some obvious high variance choices, like any rookie from those 5 draft picks. Tua, certainly. Jameis Winston could be a guy, depending on how that goes there. But if there's one guy who can surprise people and really come out of nowhere, it's the same guy that Nate just brought up as he talked about the reason why the Denver Broncos could be very good. And I think this would surprise especially Carolina Panthers fans who were very frustrated with him last year. But it's the Broncos for me. I think Teddy Bridgewater getting in there is just getting into such a great environment. It's the best environment that he's ever been in as far as who his weapons are. He's got a legit deep threat. So we talked about that you want to have these guys that can fill the different roles on a basketball team before when I talked about, Giannis and Steph Curry. Well, that's what you have here. You have Sutton, who's the true number one. You have Judy, who could be a true number one kind of on his own, but he can just absolutely be a terror over the middle of the field with his route running ability to go along with the way that Sutton also takes the top off the defense. And then you've got Fant there, who is the big target over the middle, controlling the paint. And then you've got KJ Hamler, who can get in and out of the breaks and handle any sort of those nickel responsibilities, work in those short areas. So you get that whole different squad. You got that basketball team of a wide receiver group. The offensive line has improved it from last year. And Teddy's a guy from a traits perspective. I've always loved his leadership ability, his decision-making ability, his accuracy. I always come back to these traits for a quarterback. I think he's got enough athleticism, but really it's those things, his ability to protect the football and place it.
Alex, what do you got for the numbers?
People are probably not going to be very satisfied with an answer of a breakout player who already has a 5,000-yard season on his resume. But I kind of like Jameis Winston to break out as like a sort of a different kind of player. His 5,000-yard season a couple of years ago was actually like the worst season he had in terms of points earned because of all the interceptions he threw. And there's something to be said for, and this is actually research that I've seen on the internet recently, that interceptions that are thrown from situations where your expected points are relatively low anyway. If you're in a 3rd and long situation and you throw it 30 yards downfield, it's not that big of a loss. And so there's something to be said for sort of toning down the worse interceptions. And, there's the whole thing with the improving his eyesight and stuff like that. And that's obviously not a scouting perspective. But this is a guy who has all the talent in the world, has put up big numbers, and just a little bit of tuning in terms of the interception rate has a huge difference, not only in terms of his individual statistics, but also in terms of just the way that the team moves the ball down the field and can maintain drives over the course of a game.
So you both picked guys that have been around the league for a little bit. I want you to answer this off instinct in 15 seconds or less. Who's the breakout second-year quarterback in 2021?
Tua,
yeah.
Seems like a clear answer.
I think Joe Burrow performed a lot like we expected him to perform. I'd be surprised if Joe Burrow came along and all of a sudden became like what we saw out of Justin Herbert last year. So, I don't think that's the choice. I think that Herbert, if he performed as well as he performed last year, I think that would be great for him. And, Tua is the next guy that you look at there. And certainly there were some positive signs that you saw. There was also a guy that was recovering from injury and never really fully got an off season. So I think that's the upside. And he's in a great environment in Miami.
All right, same question, different position. Question number 4 of 10 on this show. Who's the breakout pass rusher in 2021? Nathan Cooper, give us the scouting take.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways you can go. There's a lot of good young pass rushers here, but I think you need to watch out for Chase Winovich in New England. He had 5.5 sacks each of his first 2 seasons, so that's obviously nothing to sneeze at, but I think he's going to have an even bigger year this year. Always been a rangy player, played with a high motor, good technique. Coming out of Michigan, I think he's one of those guys who, is not, he's not your true try hard player. He does have that high motor. He's always trying and always really getting into the backfield and into the thick of it. He plays with good technique and has good skill and traits as well. Improved first step quickness, something that he didn't have a ton of, coming out of Michigan, but he's improved that since coming to New England. Plays with good leverage at the point of attack. Things that you look for in good pass rushers. Uses heavy hands, good pass rush repertoire, uses a lot of different moves and stuff as well. So he's a guy that I think I wouldn't be shocked to see him come out, maybe have double-digit sacks this year. So, 5.5 each of his first 2 seasons is definitely good, but I think he's going to break out and get closer to 10 this year.
Cool, good pick. Matt, who do you got?
I got an easy answer that's hard to explain in 90 seconds. Pressures above expectation is a stat that we rolled out over the offseason. Essentially, what it tells you, we already know that pressures are more predictive of sacks than sacks themselves. Well, what if we can get an expected pressure rate for you and be able to create a pressures above or below expectation stat? We've done that. Bryce Rossler led the development of it. Top 3 pass rushers in the stat last year were Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, and TJ Watt. So it's really, really good what's going on here. Really, really gets down to the skill of the players and also rewards interior rushers appropriately for what they're doing. Of the smaller name guys in the top 10 to keep an eye on, John Franklin Myers. Didn't watch a lot of the Jets last year, I got to admit. Not an edge rusher that we think of as a traditional pass rusher, but on 329 pass snaps last year, he got 41 pressures, which is good from any alignment. Honorable mention, Matt Judon. He's obviously been a good player. Never had double-digit sacks before. Based on his numbers, he's got a strong chance to get there this year.
John Franklin Myers, 4th-round pick of the Rams in 2018, and will be in his 2nd season with the New York Jets. All right, sticking with defense, scouting side, we stick with Matt. Which team has the best defense, the scariest defense?
Ooh, there are a bunch. You look at the Super Bowl champs, bringing everybody back. That's certainly one. The Rams also stand out in the NFC. I'm a little bit cooler on the Washington football team than other people because I think things went just about as good as they could last year for them. And, any sort of injuries on that defense, especially up front, could really hinder them. In the AFC, the Steelers have been good forever, and the Broncos, we talked about them earlier. Coop brought them up. They've got a high upside defense with Surtain coming in there and their pass rush. But I think I might like the Ravens defense even more than either of those teams in the AFC based on the strength of their front 3. They've just got those 3 giants up front. They should be back, not dealing with COVID issues this year, and they've got the best group of corners in the league. So all of those teams are in the mix for me. But overall, when you say the word scariest, and I come back to who scares me the most from a scouting perspective, there's the scariest guy in the league to play is Aaron Donald. If you're the Bears, you're literally thinking about not playing Justin Fields right now just to avoid what happened to Tua in his first game last year, getting swallowed up by Aaron Donald on his 3rd snap of the game. So that's the scariest one for me, and it really just comes back to that one dude.
Who's the 2nd scariest player in the league?
Ooh, that's a great question. The 2nd scariest, based on last year, you might have to throw TJ Watt up there in the mix. He's just impossible to account for as a pass rusher. And then all the other guys that you have on the Steelers, that makes it really tough to kind of double team anybody.
Alec, what do you got from a numbers perspective?
Matt has teed me up incredibly for this. First of all, he explained pressures above expectation, so I don't have to. Second of all, he just mentioned TJ Watt, who was on the team that I'm going to talk about. Because when I think about scary defenses, I think about being afraid of the pass rush. And the Steelers led the NFL in total pressures last year. They led the NFL in pressures above expectation with 33, which was 13 more than the next highest team. In terms of individual players, they had 4 guys in the top 25 in the NFL in wins above replacement, specifically from pass rush. Watt, Tuitt, Hayward, and Dupree. Dupree's not on the team anymore, but that's a front that is really scary, and I don't even necessarily care about the rest of the team, but obviously they're all right as well. If you can get that pass rush, that's a scary defense.
Neither of you said Tampa Bay. Should we have any thoughts on Tampa Bay in this?
I think we can talk about the Bucs. I don't think that's telling people anything. Like that team, like I said before, they underperformed their statistical profile by a fair amount in the regular season, and they're poised to be very good. But it is kind of a boring answer to some extent.
Yeah, they've got a pair of absolutely incredible linebackers that play in both phases. They've got a really good young secondary that's just going to keep getting better. Guys like Winfield back there. And then we saw what the pass rush did in the Super Bowl last year. I think that was a depleted offensive line that they went against, but they rode that all the way through the playoffs against several depleted offensive lines when you looked at going through Green Bay as well. And they rode that. So, yeah, they're right there in terms of that conversation, certainly in that top 5 mix.
All right, that was a bonus question. The next question is one we put on Twitter, too. Which team has the greatest possible variance in performance this season? Mike Bauer said the Bears, mediocre with Andy Dalton, undefeated with Justin Fields. Haha. Connor said the Cardinals. Feels like they win the division in a best case, go 5-12, get a new coach in a worst case. Colts were also tossed out as a possibility here, depending on how Carson Wentz fares. Nathan, give us your scouting perspective on this one.
Yeah, I could be going against the grain here. This team has been brought up, as a team that could make the playoffs. But I'm going to go with the Niners. This team was 4-12 in 2018, made it to a Super Bowl, 13-3 in 2019, and then back to 6-10 last season. It's definitely a good enough roster to make it, double-digit wins, really make it to the playoffs. I think they had a down year last year. Obviously, Jimmy G at quarterback, he's definitely good enough to be that game manager that we're looking for. You're talking about Trey Lance. Maybe he's that guy that's going to come in late in games. I know they're talking about him maybe kind of rotating in a little bit later in games and be sort of that closer type of player, which I think is going to be okay for him, his first season while he sort of keeps learning. But you look at Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, those guys at receivers, those guys are playmakers. George Kittle, one of the best tight ends in the league as well. And then you look at the defense, Nick Bosa, Javon Kinlaw, Fred Warner, all these guys gotten big money and big time game changers on the defensive side. But I do worry about the injuries a little bit. I worried about that last year, and they had a ton of them. I don't think it's going to be that crazy this year, but you're in another tough division. You have the Rams, you have the Seahawks, an up-and-coming team in the Cardinals. I think you're looking at a team that has a high variance because they're in a good division. They had a lot of injuries last year, but then they also have the possibility of maybe being out there and getting to 10 wins because that roster is definitely good enough for it.
Right on time. And we go to Alex with the numbers answer on this one.
Based on my previous answers, I guess the Cardinals would also qualify here, but in looking at the numbers, I think it might be the Dolphins. Obviously, we mentioned that Tua is a potential breakout quarterback, but there is some uncertainty there, and uncertainty at the quarterback position leads to a lot of variance. In the last 2 years, they're in the top 5 in terms of their variance, in terms of game over game total points. So they've been going up and down over the last 2 years as it stands. And then you add in new skill position players that are speedsters, but also have some injury risk. So like the speedster part for Jalen Waddle and Will Fuller obviously creates a boomer bust element, but also injury risk creates a boomer bust element. So there's a lot of uncertainty there just in terms of the quality of the players. And I'll also mention that on the defensive side, they traded away Shaq Lawson. So there's a little bit of fuzziness there. And from a defensive perspective, their best player is a cornerback, Xavier Howard. And we know how variable cornerback performance can be year over year.
That might be my favorite question in the set that we've got here. I think there are some interesting possible answers. All right. Something a little more possibly straightforward. Best offensive and defensive rookies in 2021. Reminder what we're doing here. We're doing 10 questions covering the NFL season. Best offensive and defensive rookies in 2021. Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, Patrick Surtain, a receiver. Nathan, from a scouting perspective, you saw as many of these guys as could be seen. What do you got?
Yeah, I want to say Kyle Pitts, but I just think there's too many quarterbacks this year. I think I have to go with the favorite and Trevor Lawrence on the offensive side. I think he'll get the most playing time, the most opportunity. Obviously, Mac Jones just got the job in New England, but you're looking at former teammate Travis Etienne. He's out for the year, but I really like James Robinson last year. Didn't have a ton of good total points numbers, but as an actual player on the field, good as a runner, good as a receiver. That's what you need for a young quarterback. So I think that's going to be huge for him. DJ Chark, Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault. These are a solid trio of receivers that he's going to be throwing to. Chenault's basically a running back out as a receiver. Breaks tons of tackles. Definitely good players there. Obviously getting Marvin Jones in from Detroit. Definitely a lot of good veteran presences out in that offense. Now that Mac Jones is given the starting job, I think it's going to be a close race. But Trevor Lawrence, I think he showed everything in preseason that you wanted to see from him. He has a strong arm. He took command of the offense. Good leader, even as a rookie. I think he's going to be a guy that he's going to have enough weapons around him. He's going to have some good numbers. For defense, I know I'm cutting it close here. I'm going to go Zaven Collins out of Arizona. A lot of good linebackers in this class, but he has good versatility to play all three linebacker positions. Aggressive near the line, shed blockers in the box, good fundamentals as a pass rusher, and good coverage ability as well. So I think those are my two for offense and defense.
Hit the buzzer. Matt, what do you got for stats?
I mean, if you go strictly on the stats, it's Mac Jones, and it's not even close. I could list off all the categories that he led college football in last year, but I'll save that for the end in case I'm up against the clock here. At running back, if you want to look at other positions, Javonte Williams led running backs in the Football Rookie Handbook with a total points rating of 99 last year. He was just absolutely incredible, and I think Coop mentioned it before, a guy that could get a bigger role. At the receiver position, from the stat perspective, you look at Devontae Smith and Elijah Moore. They led receivers in total points rating and total points per game last year. But then also remember, Jamar Chase had incredible production last time he played in 2019. Looking at on the defensive perspective, I think it's a bit harder to say because it's a combination of the stats and who's going to get the opportunities early. One pass rusher who performed well and expects to see time early is Jalen Phillips, who's on the Dolphins, came from the Miami Hurricanes to the Miami Dolphins. Again, the Dolphins were brought up earlier, a team that could be interesting there, and he could be filling in some of that pass rush role for them. He'll be an interesting three-down player that can fit in. So he's a guy that'll shout based on those stats. Now, back to Mac Jones. Here are the categories that he led in. Tell me if I'm over the buzzer. Total points per game, total points rating per play, passing total points per game, total points rating per pass, on-target percentage, independent quarterback rating, catchable percentage, IQR under pressure, completion percentage. Yeah, he was pretty good last year. The SIS Data Hub Pro is the premier football data tool and your ticket to the winner's circle for your fantasy season or to win your bets this year. You can celebrate the new football season with 20% off by signing up with the promo code KICKOFF at pro.sisdatahub.com. A subscription to the SIS Data Hub Pro gets you our new Tendency Reports tool. You can explore team tendencies with a set of in-depth tools and filters. It includes offense and defense. You can exclude garbage time. You can filter by field position, down and distance, and more. And data goes back to 2018. So definitely want to check that out on the Data Hub Pro. Sign up at pro.sisdatahub.com to receive a free 7-day trial. Again, new users get 20% off their first monthly or annual subscription, and you can take advantage of the offer by visiting the pricing page, entering the coupon code KICKOFF, and this applies to any subscription for NFL, college football, or both. Sign up now. This offer ends on September 13th. You'll want to check it out at pro.sisdatahub.com.
So from there, we go to this one, another type of rookie. Which new coaching staff are you most confident in for 2021? Nathan Cooper, give us the scouting perspective on this.
Yeah, it's probably Brandon Staley with the Chargers. He's taken over a strong roster, but I'm going to take this chance to sort of be a homer here and say Dan Campbell for the Lions. Now, are they going to actually be a good team in 2021? Definitely not. But this is coming from a Lions fan. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I love the hire of Dan Campbell. I love what he's done so far, even if most of it has just been great sound bites. I love the hire of Brad Holmes as GM as well, coming over from the Rams. But me and our rookie handbook, we actually had the Lions having the best draft class in 2021. Penei Sewell, plug-and-play starter at tackle. He's going to start out at right tackle, and he had a little bit of trouble there in preseason, but I think he's going to be a guy that, he's going to be there for 10 to 15 years. And then they got two maulers at defensive tackle, Levi Onwuzurike and Aleem McNeil. These guys are tough on the interior defensive line, a lot of fun to watch, and guys that are, offensive linemen that are not going to be happy going against these guys as well. And then mid-round picks, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Derek Barnes were actually bright spots in the preseason for the team. And I think those guys are going to definitely make an impact in their first year and moving forward. And like I said, by no means is this team going anywhere this year, especially with the current state of this roster. But the new organization, the new front office here, I like what they're doing. I think they've started to create a good solid foundation to move forward, for 2021 and beyond.
Alex, give us the statistical answer and explain why the correct answer is the New York Jets.
I love the fact, I'm just going to breeze by the Jets part. I love the fact that he mentioned the Lions, though, because I looked at that coaching staff and I was like, these guys are all players that played when I was a kid, and I aged 10 years spiritually while reading the names. Like Mark Brunell, Deuce Staley, Antoine Randall, Hank Fraley. As an Eagles fan, I'm aware of his existence, but so it was a wonder to read that coaching staff. I think that the Chargers are a really good option here, because not only are you bringing in Ronaldo Hill as a defensive coordinator coming from a pretty good defense in Denver that doesn't have the crazy talent that it did several years ago. Offensive staff from the Rams, from the Saints, from the Falcons, all of these teams that have great offensive schemes that are putting points on the board and are definitely going to be able to come up with interesting concepts. The big question I would have for that team is you're bringing in guys from all different places, and while there might be similarities in those schemes, there is a lot of gelling that needs to be done. Those guys are going to come in with different terminology, different ideas. So I kind of think that I like the Falcons staff in the sense that I like the idea of bringing the Titans concepts of play action, throwing it over the middle of the intermediate part of the field. It would have been great to have Julio Jones as part of that. He's now in the Titans system that's going to really favor him in that sense. But I think that Calvin Ridley and particularly Kyle Pitts in that like play action, throw it 15 yards downfield in a dig, like that kind of stuff's really interesting, and trying to figure out some way to get the ball in the end zone when you're in close in the red zone is going to be a big deal for them.
Nathan got to be a homer by bringing up the Lions. That was why I brought up the Jets, but we'll move on. Manocherian might be the most optimistic, positive person at the company. That's why he's going to handle both sides of our ninth question. Let's start with the statistical take. Matt, which team is going to have the biggest decline in 2021?
Well, I don't know if anybody would ever mistake me for Ted Lasso, but thank you. From my perspective on this one, I know Bills Mafia is going to come at me. I love the way that organization is run. I think they're doing so many intelligent things at all levels. And so I want to be careful here. This is really just in terms of coming down from where they were last year. I think things went about as well as they could for them last year. Things really fell into place quickly with the receiving core that they brought in and how things went for Josh Allen. Josh Allen was 5th in total points last year, which is a metric, but it shows you what the performance was on the field if you didn't see it for yourself. The guy's obviously incredibly talented. I just think things went about as good as they could go. One thing with that, both Josh Allen and Justin Herbert, people certainly saw a lot of the production that they had. Each of these guys also threw 10 interceptions last year. That's not a ton of interceptions. That's only one more than single-digit interceptions, but it's also a few interceptions away from potentially being a problematic number of interceptions. So I think that with the way things went last year, I do expect a little bit of, if it went that well again for either of those guys, then these teams will both be in fantastic shape. I could see a little bit coming back to earth in terms of both of those guys' performance. And despite the fact that I like both those teams, that's the area that I look. So I got to go with the Bills, despite my rampant optimism.
And for the statistical side of this question, we turn things over to Matt Manocherian.
Yeah, there are two teams that really jump out to me in terms of that could have a decline this year. We already talked about the way that the Niners project to be an improved team. The Browns are one team that when you look at two metrics that we really care about a lot, both the Pythagorean wins last year, which is basically based on the points scored and allowed, how many games would we have expected you to win? And then based on SIS WAR, really kind of like the true talent of the team that separates itself from the actual wins. The Browns and the Titans are teams that both performed above where we would expect. We wouldn't expect either of those teams to have won 11 games last year, and we would expect a little bit of a regression this year back towards those Pythagorean wins and SIS WAR metrics. So the Browns were at 7.7 Pythagorean wins, 8.3 SIS WAR wins. The Titans were at 9.3 Pythagorean wins, a little bit better by scoring, but just 7.1 SIS WAR wins. I think both those teams are candidates to take a step back this year.
So 3 and 4 win drop-offs respectively for the Browns and Titans, potentially.
And add an extra game, but yeah.
And adding an extra, so it would be 8 and 9, 7 and 10, rather than 8 and 8, 7 and 9. All right, last question. That actually feeds us well right into this last question. Which team will end the season with the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, and who will they draft? Let's go by the numbers first. Alex, what do you got?
This has to be the Texans, doesn't it? Like this team. I mean, well, obviously the Deshaun Watson question is a huge question. And the reason it's a huge question is because in 2020, he had one of the best seasons we've seen in recent memory from a quarterback perspective. He was worth over 4 wins above replacement. The problem is that the team itself in total was worth less than 4 wins above replacement, meaning that the entire rest of the team was below replacement level. And so if you have any amount of removal of both Deshaun Watson not having like a career year and also Deshaun Watson not playing, that team is dangling by a thread. As for who they take, obviously that depends on whether Watson's still on the team, but let's assume that they're taking a quarterback to replace him in some form or fashion. Spencer Rattler of Oklahoma, Sam Howell of UNC are interesting options. Rattler's a bit more likely based on what I've heard. I will mention that Howell is interesting, although the UNC quarterback thing might scare you off because of Mitch Trubisky. I will point out that he has, will have more than 1 season as a starter and also had a better first year as a starter, or his start year as a starter last year than Trubisky, sandwiched between Mac Jones and Kyle Trask in terms of total points in 2020. For Rattler, he is in that Oklahoma program that has produced a lot of early drafted quarterbacks recently. His independent quarterback rating in 2020 was lower than all those guys. I like him, but I think that system's going to obscure some things.
There you go. All right, so that's why you would go with the North Carolina quarterback Howell. All right, Nathan Cooper, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this might be the one that we slightly agree, I guess, because I agree. I think it's the Texans, and I'm going to go with Spencer Rattler. So I'll sort of finish what Alex was saying there. It's at least on the scouting side. We don't know about the Deshaun Watson thing, so I think they have to go quarterback. I think that team is really going to struggle this year without him. Rattler, he's technically only a third-year freshman, so he may even opt to stick around for another year or two. But I think if he plays well this year, he can't really have his stock go much higher, and I think that's a good spot for him to go. He did turn the ball over a lot early in 2020, and that actually led to him being benched in the Texas game. But beyond that, once he got back in there, he was on fire at the end of the season. One of the top quarterbacks in the country. Even with a little slight windup, he has a super quick release, works the pocket well, keeps his eyes downfield, good arm strength, accuracy all over the field, especially on the deep ball. And he's a pass-first quarterback, so he's not a runner, but he can, run and pick up yardage, good athlete, good mobility to be able to work the pocket and gain some yards with his legs if he needs to. So I think Rattler and Texans, that's a pretty good marriage right there. And I think there's a lot of people that think that's pretty possible, especially if everything goes the way people think it will this year.
That's what we do at Sports Info Solutions. We bring the stats and the scouting together, ideally to work in harmony. Matt, you want to have the last word on things we can expect to see in 2021?
To just what Alex was saying, talking about the Texans a little bit, and then thinking about it a little bit more. Alex, I don't know how many 100 conversations we've had about what is replacement level in the NFL. The answer might just be Tyrod Taylor.
So is that what we're going to end on?
I think so.
All right. So just to go back, Chiefs and Bucks favorites, sleepers, Bills, who also have very high variance, and Dallas Cowboys. All right, so there we go. All right, you can follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Mano, MattMano. Alex is at Vigman on Campus. Think Big Man on Campus with a V. And Nathan Cooper is at NCoopDraft. And you can follow us at sportsinfo_SIS. This wraps up the Off the Charts Football Podcast. We'll be back next week with a look ahead to Week 1. For Matt, Nathan, and Alex, and our producer Justin Stein, I'm Mark Simon. Thank you for listening.